So that's like a macro level view, about 30,000 feet. In a few minutes we'll go to 60, and then right now we're going to zoom into like 10,000 feet. So we're going to talk about some examples of some of the folks who are interred there and try and put some life and vitality around the bones that are buried there. These are some of the family names. There are probably about 60 people buried in there that I can count. And it's basically about 1/4 of an acre in terms of size, just so you know that, surrounded by the stone fence. So there's not a lot of names in here that I recognize because again, we moved into Cortland in 1988, so I'm not as immersed in Cortland as some folks in this room, but maybe people do recognize a lot of names here. Say again?
Walsworth is twice.
It's twice?
First and last column.
Oh, you're right.
My golly.
Thanks, Doug.
Making a mental note. There must have been a very, prolific family. They multiplied.
Marshalls?
Yeah, so there's some names. I think Cummings is a, yeah.
Cummins, without the G.
No.
Well, the funny thing you find, though, is that, with like Philippe Van Cortland, he lost his T.
No.
And you see some very strange deviations on the headstones versus some of the obituaries versus some of the family records. So there's a lot of fussing about with spelling. It's not always an accurate science. So, but anyway, that's just that level. So let's talk about one of the veterans. And so you can see some of the stones that I referred to. So the woodchuck hole is actually right about in here. And he's been throwing the stones like woodchucks do, right and left. So this first fella is a guy named John Stanbro, 1759 to 1844. It's a beautiful stone. It's got some nice carving, and again, carving itself is a neat discipline that you can explore a lot more. But I'm going to talk in pretty broad strokes. His family moved from Rhode Island. They were originally from England, so we've got this sweep from England, like most Americans. We came from Europe at that stage. His original family settled in Rhode Island. He and his father, so he's a junior, and his brother James all fought in the Revolutionary War. He was a private, and they mustered in the Rhode Island area. He married a young lady named Hannah Whittisley from Stonington, Connecticut, right across the border from Rhode Island. They lived there for 20 years. He moved to Otsego County first, both he and his brother James. They decided, we're going to do this thing that most Americans at that time period did. They moved west. And at that point in time, Cortland and the Alleghenies, that was west. That was the wild frontier. So they moved originally to Otsego. And then he purchased some land, 1813, in the town of Cortlandville, which was at that point Homer. He was believed to be a Quaker. He raised 12 children who scattered off to Iowa and Kansas and whatnot. So again, they were pretty prolific also. He received his pension in 1831, and he's listed as having lived in Virgil during the 1825 census, so there's a little ambiguity as far as that goes. He's buried side by side with his wife, and his grave is listed in the Revolutionary Patriots. So there's a veteran. What I find interesting, and 2 points I want to raise here, is the thing about Cortland is, I just find this really interesting. This move westward, we think of that as being like this abstraction that we read in history books. But the reality is Cortland, our town of Cortland, was involved in that. So the idea that somebody moved from England and then to Rhode Island, and they walked or canoed up the Tiopneoga to the town of Cortlandville, and that was considered the Wild West at the time. And then they raised children, and then the children went out to the Midwest, and then past the Sierras and the Rockies and into Oregon territories. And so the idea that Cortland, our little town, is in this big giant sweep of history, I think that's fascinating. I think people should understand that. And it's not this esoteric thing. It's something that happened here, and it's important because it happened here. And the other thing I want to point out is this little thing. A lady named Jackie Shatner, who was the wife of a descendant of James, contacted me because somehow we stumbled upon each other on the internet. And so all of this information that I've got was from Jackie, because she's doing this genealogical research for her family. Her husband, I don't know, I think he runs a diner. She does, and this is what I was talking about before. If we can do nothing by preserving these cemeteries, then leave some popcorn for other people who have genealogical interests or local history interests. If we can leave that trail for them, then we can start to bring these vague lives into reality. You know, the bones become flesh, and we start to see the people for the reality that they were and the important people that they were, even though they're not big shots. So I think that's another trend you're going to see on the next couple of slides as well. So that's John Stanbro. No? Yeah, go ahead. Next guy is a guy named Robert McAllister, 1816 to 1879. How am I doing for time? I'm going really slow, aren't I?
No, you're good.
This fellow unfortunately committed suicide. So this is a clipping from the Cortland County Democrat from 1879. He committed suicide by cutting his throat. He went out in the backyard one night and cut his throat with a jackknife. And it's, of course, described in way too much detail. But it's interesting that, you know, he was a man of more than ordinary intelligence and was well posted on all subjects. This was a man who, his family was very concerned for him. They were watching him because he'd probably taken on some signs of depression or something like that. But when I read an obituary like this, I get concerned with the question, why? Why would a guy go out in the middle of the night and cut his own throat with a jackknife? Obviously huge despair or something amiss there. So if you want to click. So it turns out that he has a son named Robert, 1846 to 1870. This is a fellow who, like the sweep I mentioned before, moves from Cortland. He's going to move to Chicago. He's going to work on the railroads and try and set his family up out there and be a success, like all of us try to do. He's working for the railroad, and he falls while walking on top of the railroad underneath some railroad cars. And 4 of them, no less than 4 of them, run him over, and he dies within 5 hours. And then he has a buddy, Mr. Zero Tanner, who escorts his body back to Cortland, which is a very nice duty, and the paper made a point of reflecting upon that. And he's buried, he was mentioned in the Christian church at South Cortland. So here's this guy who's a young man, he's in his 20s, and he's off to make his future, and he's run over by a train. And his friend brings him home. And not soon thereafter, not too long thereafter, his father goes off in the middle of the night, and you know, he's a depressed guy probably, and it's a pretty sad thing. But again, if you can capture the sadness as well as the joy of these people, I think you're doing the world a service, an important service, even if it's a sad story, because the joys are as important as the sadnesses. And then this guy is another McAllister, and I'm working with, actually, this is Hazel McAllister. She lives in Virgil. I'm working with her to try and understand who this fella is. He's either Morgan's brother or he's Morgan's cousin, but he was another veteran. He fought in New York 76 Infantry, which played a really, really big role in the Civil War. He fought at all of these major Civil War battles, Manassas, Antietam, Fredericksburg, the Wilderness. A lot of them were losses, but of course the 76 also fought at Gettysburg. He was not able to make this reunion with these fellas here, which was a photograph I got online. But his camp probably looked like that, because that's Camp Doubleday, which was, the 76 did training at the Camp Doubleday, which I believe is in Massachusetts, before they were engaged in the war itself. And again, this popcorn trail. These folks contacted me. She said, you know, I think the guy the stone you're standing next to in that article is related to us. And I went out and visited them and took photographs of their family Bible, and again, bringing something that's abstract to life. And I think that's really important if we could do those kinds of things. So, another veteran. These are folks I'm trying to do some research on now. This guy, Rivolo Ford, a tree fell on him and he died. It's just like...
While chopping in the woods.
Yeah, while chopping in the woods, a tree branch fell on him and he died. And, you know, the way people died back then is terrible. You know, they didn't have airlifts and whatnot. So, and of course, the obituaries always captured how they died, particularly if it was interesting, I guess. The thing about him, I'm looking up online the name Rivolo. I'm like, it's got to be biblical or something. Anybody know anything about the name Rivolo? Well, the one thing I could find was that it's a palindrome, which is basically Oliver spelled backwards.
Oh, wow.
So, and then Kathy Beardsley says, you know, maybe his mom just gave him maybe he was just a breech birth. And so So if you see my presentation again anytime, I'm going to put that in there, and it's going to be a fact.
Read for it. You should.
Because that could be all it was, but I just thought that was kind of interesting. And Zena Ford, from a ecclesiastical standpoint, this guy was involved in one of the churches out there, but I'm not sure exactly how. So I want to do some research, and I just think that's a kind of interesting subject in and of itself. So we've done the extreme close-up of some of the people buried there, and there's a lot more people that have to be learned about, and probably we won't do that with all of them. But what I want to do is kind of zoom back out again really quickly.